Good afternoon, friends. I'm Stephen Ben-Nun. You're watching Israeli News Live, and today we have a very special guest. As I said to you, we were going to have a special guest today, but of course, as always, I never reveal who that guest is in advance. That way the enemy has less power to be able to do anything about the meeting. And so I want to introduce to you, those of you that may not already know who Doug Riggs is. I did not get to know who he was until just a few days ago when my wife shared the information with me about Brother Riggs, and it has been nothing but a blessing for me. So Doug Riggs, thank you for coming on with us. And if you would, I'd like to open in prayer. I don't always do this because we're a news broadcast as well, but we do from time to time. But especially when you have two brothers coming together, if you wouldn't mind leading us in prayer to start this off.
Yes, well, thank you, Stephen, for this opportunity. And Father, we just thank you that we have access to you through our Lord Jesus Christ and in his finished work. We thank you for you, Lord, for your high priesthood ministry at the right hand of the Father. We just stand into this time, into the high priesthood ministry and intercession for this time. We ask you, Father, to articulate, nuance, and sculpt this time, that it would be what is released would be that which would best serve your purpose in this closing time of this age, and that the body of Christ would be awakened and come into the high privilege and calling that you have called us to in this generation. So we just ask you to sanctify, set apart this time to serve your eternal purpose. We pray in Jesus' name.
Douglas, if you would let people know, because you know as well as I do, there's a lot of our people will listen to every single word that's said here today. Then there's going to be also, you'll have some that they will only listen to 5 or 10 minutes. I want them to know how to find your information. Can you share with them, and we'll put it in the description below as well, how people can listen to the work that you've been doing for years now on your website, etc.
Okay. Well, I didn't really desire to have a website, so our fellow in our assembly that's been with us over 30 years, he initiated, he put together the website, said, we need to get this up. And I said, well, if you do it, well, then it has to be his initiative. So our web administrator, John Mark, began to take the messages that I presented on what was called the Bite Show, the George Ann Hughes. And at that time, as I prayed about recording these different messages on the Bite Show, which I have the Bite Show page up on my website, it was the whole goal was to prepare the people of God for these last days, the critical intel from the Bible, where we are in history, and how we could understand what God's agenda and plan is for these last days. So I began to record messages that took me 5 years, and to post them on the Bite Show. And so some of the messages, our web administrator, he took from the Bite Show page, and he went through and created PowerPoints and placed that on the video page. And so the video page, there's some sequenced versions of the Bite Show that's been edited and with PowerPoint. So that was the purpose, is to equip God's people. And all of this that is posted on there came from 30 plus years of just teaching as a pastor in the fellowship here, Morning Star Testimony Church. So all what we have posted is the accumulation of the years of teaching. And then as far as that which represents the page, which is the SRADID page, which is Satanic Ritual Abuse / dissociative identity disorder, this is our seminars that we've done in Germany and South Africa, and training people how to identify and work with people that are really coming out of this last days agenda to create a super race. And these women have been born into this project, and so we've been involved in training people and doing the work. So that page is really dedicated to helping the counselors and survivors work through their issues and understanding what's happened to them, because we really are at the end of the age. And I think if people could just see where we are now in the history, I mean, never before in history has there been a global synchronized lockdown like we've had now, with the satanic agenda to attack the body of Christ, social distancing, basically everything that would thwart God's purpose for God's people to be assembling together in these last days. So maybe I've gone beyond what your question is, but I'll just pause there and just state that my burden is to see God's people come into the fullness of what God has provided for them in these last days, because we are really going to be facing unprecedented times ahead. But God has made provision for us to come into the fullness of that which will represent his countermove against Satan's final attack against the body and bride of Christ.
Amen, amen. And so, Doug, the actual name of your website itself, what was the name of that website?
It's just my name, DougRiggs.org, and all the page comes up.
Excellent, thank you. And Doug, the work that you have done is really amazing, and I say that because I'm blown away by it. You're going into so much depth of everything. You're going into the whole breakdown of the Nephilim, as many people know about this, the pre-flood period, the antediluvian destruction, what was going on, but they don't really know the depths of what you have really brought out that I've seen thus far, even how that the antediluvian destruction was being designed to be able to try to destroy the seed of the woman that was going to crush the serpent's head. And but if we could, I know I've shared a lot with people when we're looking at the different things. We look at Genesis chapter 6, for example. We see this is what gives us what some people, because a lot of people don't like the book of Enoch, but at least Enoch you kind of get a little bit more in-depth understanding. I know in the Dead Sea Scrolls we have a portion of the book of Genesis which does concur a lot with what is in the book of Enoch as well. And then we have Ezra chapter 9, where again we see probably a little clearer the fact that the seed is being mingled by Israel. After Israel had been warned not to go after the abominations of the nations, which were the Canaanite, Perizzite, Jebusites, etc. If you can bring the people up to speed, just if we can start maybe from pre-destruction, how this Nephilim thing is going on, what happened when the children of Israel were coming into the land, and up to the time of Ezra. If we can just kind of do a little recap of history on this and your perspective of this as it's going to relate to the day we're living in, because we're literally seeing, as Jesus says in Matthew 24, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. They were eating and drinking and given in marriage, which we know is not a typical given in marriage as most people think.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, it goes back to the proto-evangel, which in Genesis 3:15, where the prophecy is that the seed of the woman would crush the seed of the serpent, and there'd be this warfare between the seed war. And so if you look at that passage as being kind of a template and foundation, the Nakash was in the garden. Of course, the Hebrew can also mean one who has powers of divination. He's a shining one, serpentine. Well, he's already there when Adam is created, so he had already fallen. And we see the judgment that is pronounced against him, that the seed of the woman doesn't have seed. Okay, I mean, so obviously that's quite interesting. So the woman's seed would crush the head of the serpent. So from that point in the narrative, when is the first attack upon the seed of the woman to destroy the genetic genome that would require the seed of the woman to be human, to be a redeemer? Well, it's Genesis 6, 1-4. And what do we have in Genesis 6, 1-4? We have the B'nai Elohim that is never used of men, that we see in Job 1:6 and 2:1 and chapter 38, verse 7 and 8, that these refer to angels. So these angels took wives to whomever they chose, and took means, I think it was they seized them. It was pretty strong, and the result is they produced a hybrid offspring. So we have what we call fallen angels, the B'nai Elohim. They took wives and they produced through sexual union, regardless of how people have an issue with that, but we could go to Jude 6 and 7 and see that they left their habitation and they took on a physicality, but they produced a hybrid offspring. Is the result of a union between fallen angels, the fallen B'nai Elohim, and the union with human women. So we have a hybrid. Now, this took place in the days of Jared. So from the time of Jared to the flood, what do we have? 11 or 1200 years. So we have a massive. We know from Numbers 13, verse 32, that these giants were devouring the inhabitants, and that they were cannibalizing them. They were destroying the earth, and so the genome was so corrupted that had God not saved Noah, we said in Genesis 6:9, it says Noah was pure in his generation. I think Tom or Tomim, it means he's genetically pure. He's not corrupted. So God saved Noah plus 7 because they're genetically pure, and wiped out the entire race that had been infected. It was a satanic design to destroy the seed of the woman. And so the flood came as a result of that, which would have destroyed the pure genome line for Jesus. All right, so now we have what happened after that. Well, we come to Nimrod, chapter 10. He's born a regular human being, but he becomes a Gibberim. So I believe that the Tower of Babel was like a modern day CERN, and of course he went through rituals and he became a Gibberim. And so if you look at pictures of Gilgamesh, he's holding an iron lion under his arm. So he became that which I believe is the ultimate transhumanist. But we come to Genesis 14, we see some of these Nephilim tribes are in the land. They're there. And now, if the seed of the woman is going to be perpetuated through history, now Abraham is called out. He's going to be the father of all those who believe. And so what do we see with reference to the second incursion of fallen angels that would produce the Nephilim? I do not believe that the seed would pass through, would survive the flood. I just don't believe that. I believe there was a second incursion. Pember believes that, Bill Bollinger, others. So, but it was refined, more restricted and confined to the land of Canaan. Why? Because in Abraham, we have the seed of Abraham, which is the extension of the seed of the woman. So therefore, within the proximity of the land of Canaan, God commanded Joshua to kill every man, woman, child, and beast within the borders of that Palestine. Why? Because Satan had preempted, and he had in place that which would corrupt the seed. He knew in advance. So he prepositioned these tribes that would be the inheritance of the children of Israel. And so God commanded them to kill all those that were not of the pure bloodline of the race of Adam. And so we know, going into the Judges and throughout in the time of David, they were not all killed. I mean, we look at Goliath. He was a hybrid. He was a Nephilim. He had 4 other brothers. And so where do we have the evidence that they all died out? I think the first generation is one thing, and I think they became weaker as they would reproduce. But the point is that this infected bloodline was a menace throughout Israel, and how it extends into the time of Ezra, I don't know. I can't speak into that because I'm not really a historian. So I'll just stop and pause there and see if you have any thoughts or comments, Steve.
You know, it's interesting because we do have, in the Hebrew language, we do have places where the house of Israel was actually guilty of mingling in with these, as you say, these families that Satan had placed into the land. I like the way you put that. And there are some kind of, how would you put it there? It's being referred to that there was a mingling of the seed even with the house of Israel. And we see the passing through the fire to Molech, things like that. But when we get into Ezra, where it speaks about the mingling of the seed there, a lot of people argue, they say, well, and this is the argument that was brought up with me, that they brought this out with me. They said, well, you have to understand, the Ezra commanded them to put their wives away, and that and so that was the end of it. The children never got back into the land, because I argue that when Jesus came, we find in Matthew 23 how that Jesus clearly identifies not every Pharisee, of course, but of the Pharisee, mostly of the Pharisees, that they were of their father the devil, and the works, his works they would do. He calls them vipers and serpents, and just as John did the same. And a lot of people say, well, that's metaphorically, or that's just spiritually. And I do challenge that notion that it could just be only that. But the thing that I was bringing up when this argument came up to me, that okay, they can't be Ezra 9. When we look at Ezra 9, that they divorced them and that was the end of that. And so I asked, when this one particular minister said this, he said, well, they were put away. They went back to their people. I said, well, the whole argument in Ezra, when it speaks about that the Levites and the priests were guilty in mingling the seed, I said they were mingling with the seed with the peoples of the land, not with the Babylonians. And it clearly shows it was the Canaanite, Hittites, Perizzites, etc. And later, even according to the Cyrus cylinder, Cyrus gives credit to his god Marduk for sending all the people back to their lands to worship their gods, etc. That wasn't just the children of Israel or the house of Judah. That was including the Perizzites, Moabites, Ammonites, etc. And so therefore, in my thinking, they must have gone back into the land, and then of course they continued that inbreeding program. And of course, we know the Maccabean, when the Maccabees came out, they usurp the priesthood. They throw out the Zadokite priest. They end up down in, most people believe they went down to Qumran. But there is one, Doug, there's one particular interesting historical document, I think it's about Judas Maccabee, where they said when he put on his armor, he looked like a giant. I didn't know if you were aware of that or not.
No, I remember.
So to me, Jesus really seems to be the one that shows us that we had a corrupt seed in Israel when he came on the scene to deliver the children of Israel, which my thought has always been that was where that deadly wound comes to the serpent himself, because he identifies what their program is. And this is what caused that deadly wound. But I'd like to get your perspective on this as well.
Well, I know I've heard from another brother that when he said you're of your father the devil, you're a brood of serpents. He also said of Herod that you're that go tell that fox. So I do believe there's some latitude in language that to recognize that he's not a literal fox, but it is that which emphasizes characterologically as a sly, cunning person. So the question is, in the same kind of language, would he be referring to these Pharisees as satanic in nature and deception, very religious, angel of light, etc.? So I'm not really qualified to speak into how all the genetics would culminate in the time of our Lord, but and I've discussed this with L.A. Marzulli, and we talked about, there are all those that are saying that, there's no second incursion. They were wiped out in the flood. There's no second incursion. And yet when you study history throughout the world, we have a number of cultures that describe the divine beings coming down, intermingling with women and producing a hybrid offspring. They become the world leaders, or the Quetzalcoatl, or whoever these super race were. But God wiped them out. And Steve Quayle's talked about this at L.A. And so, L.A. has actually mentioned this. I'm talking about L.A.'s at Marzulli. There have been multiple incursions. But throughout history, whenever they reach a certain a stage of development, that they would anywhere approach what happened prior to their destruction in the days of Noah, God would wipe them out. They would just disappear. What happened to these giant races of South America? Well, God wiped them out. Why? Because it wasn't time. I mean, Satan is trying to move his agenda forward to bring about that which represents what we see today. And God says no. He shut it down. So the point is where we are today in terms of this final and last incursion is truly the days of Noah. I mean, it really is like the days of Noah. And you're referring to Ezra 9 and chapter verse 2, where it talks about the sons were intermingling with the holy seed with those that were not of the Canaanite tribes. And so the word intermingle there, it's very interesting that same Hebrew word, it's the Aramaic version, but it means the same. In Daniel chapter 2, when it says in verse 43, and you saw the iron mixed, it's the exact same term that's used in Ezra 9:2, Arav, and he mixed with common clay. That would be weak, fallen Adamic humanity. They will combine with one another in the seed of men. So the they and the seed of men are distinguished. So who are the they? Well, I believe this is the final eruption of what we're seeing today. But they will not adhere. That's Davak. That's the very first time you see man and woman becoming one flesh. So I think we have a prophetic intimation of the final last days of this incursion. And there have been multiple throughout history. But to speak specifically into what you're talking about historically, my whole frame of reference is really with the contemporary evidence that this is going on today. And so that's where my frame of reference is. So your frame of reference in terms of what you're speaking into, I just don't, when it comes to all the historical connections, I would say after, let's say, the time of David or on, that's outside my ability to even assess or comment on.
And Doug, when we're looking, of course, I look at Daniel as well, and I feel like that Daniel is actually prophesying of the day we're living in that happens there. And,
yeah, I do too.
And one thing I think that's interesting as well is when we look at Ezra speaks about how they came in among us unawares, and I've always wondered if that wasn't kind of implying, and it's a conjecture, I'm just kind of reaching on this, if this isn't the fact that now we're dealing with a Nephilim bloodline that is crept in, but they're no longer giants. And I think that's what we're probably even seeing today, which some people argue, well, the Nephilim were never after the flood. But I always say, well, in the book of Genesis, the book of Numbers, we see the word Nephilim in Hebrew, so I think that answers that question. But is that a possibility, or do you see that might be the same type of pattern that we're seeing today, that they have now learned to bring that demonic race in a way to where it's not easily to identify because they're no longer giants?
Well, I need to speak into that, in which I have now come to understand that the quintessential Übermensch that Hitler was seeking to bring forth as the transhumanist agenda it is a species, according to Dr. David Jacobs, is a species that looks like quintessential man. This is a DNA that comes directly from Satan as part of what I've come to understand is the Hitler Genesis 6 project. This is actually the project. But because this is outside of God's design, whenever there is any kind of incubus succumbi kind of activity in the demonic, if you have fallen angels that are still interacting with women and producing offspring, there are going to be mutations. I believe that which is the failed agenda, the mutants would be what we would call the reptilian kind of offspring, and or what people call the alien grays. I mean, they're not from outer space. I mean, they're mutations. But so Satan's goal was to create a quintessential man. That is, Antichrist doesn't only mean against Christ, it means a substitute for Christ. We know that the Antichrist and the false prophet are not fully human. They're called Therion. They're called beasts. We know they're not fully human because when Jesus returns at the second advent, that the beast and the false prophet, Revelation 19:20, are seized and they're thrown into the lake of fire. They don't even appear at the great white throne judgment like all the rest of mankind. It says in Revelation 20, verse 10, that Satan, at the end of the 1,000-year reign of Christ, is thrown into the lake of fire where the beast and the false prophet are. So we know that this particular species is not going to look like reptilian or a gray. It's quintessential man. And so therefore, when you read about David Jacobs' works, he said this program, that he calls it alien, he sees it as aliens. He's a PhD historian, teaches the only accredited course of ufology there in Templeton University. At least he did. He may be retired in Pennsylvania. So he says that in The Threat, he talks about his 30 or 35, 40 year interviewing abductees. And then his latest book, They Walk Among Us. He says, this is a program. It's well advanced. Their goal is to infiltrate the human race, to take over and make us their slaves. And he says that they are now among us and you cannot detect them. People have described them to me. You can't detect them except they're often very beautiful and perfect stature. But if you look into their eyes, there is no person there. They don't have a soul. Why? Because they're hybrid. So this is the different reports. So this may sound fantastical. It may sound like a Twilight Zone. To me, it's irrelevant to me. I don't really care what people think, but I am concerned for those that are actually working with this population of people, that they understand that this reports of them being selected, these women being selected to produce these hybrid offspring. And what's reported is that they represent a quintessential, the ultimate goal, the creme de la creme of the human race. And I want to just read something, and then I'll pause here. In a book that was released in, I think, 2007 by Tom Horn called Nephilim Stargates, he quotes an individual, it's called The Dawn of Magic by Louis Powells and Jacques Berger. He quotes him, he says this, and this is really important for us to understand contextually what this whole hybrid phenomenon represents in our generation. He quotes, Hitler's aim was neither the founding of a race of supermen, nor the conquest of the world. These were only means towards the realization of the great work he dreamed of. His real aim was to perform an act of creation, a divine operation, the goal of a biological mutation which would result in an unprecedented exaltation of the human race and the apparition of a new race of heroes and demigods and godmen. And then Tom Horn says, some believe that was Genesis 6 and could be, again, the whole idea of his agenda. And I fully concur with that.
Let me ask you this, Doug. In relation to Hitler, a lot of people, they don't realize, and this is probably one of my first awakenings, is when I found out how involved the so-called elite Jews were, the Jewish Congress, etc., that were involved in sending many of their own people to their deaths. So a lot of people are totally unaware of the connection to some of the elite Jewish families that directly worked with Hitler. And with that in mind, what was the collaboration between the two in bringing about this particular plan for the last days? And then, of course, Hitler, we know he failed. Of course, he didn't die in Germany. He ended up in, what was it, Argentina, I believe. But yeah. What's the connection there?
Well, I mean, some of these Jews just capitulated because they didn't want to die and they became quislings, etc. And so as far as my work in the last 35 years, when it comes to the Jews as being a part of this program, just a little side note, when I started doing this work years ago, I believe that the key royal family that was behind this whole global conspiracy to bring in Antichrist were the Rothschilds. And this was for a couple of years, and then I began to do the work and burrow in, and Rothschild actually means Red Shield, the original family nation. Nathan Bauer and his 5 sons, they took on that name, Red Shield Rothschild. And I come to find out that the whole Rothschild domain was a shield for royal families that were predominantly not Jewish, but they were prominently Gentiles. My number one nemesis for years was Prince Philip. You have a number of the royals, the not even the Rockefellers were not as strong as some of the other European bloodlines. But when it comes to the Jewish line, there are those that are apostate. I believe the Rothschilds are apostate. But when it comes to global conspiracy, the whole Protocols of Zion was something that was scripted to scapegoat the Jews. It has truth in it, but it's bigger than a Jewish conspiracy. We have a Gentile and Jew. So where do they all fit in? Right now, I'm working with two people. Well, let me get back to the bloodline issue. When it comes to the quintessential production, that is the hybrid representative of the false prophet, these are the Jewish bloodline. That bloodline is a descendant of Jews, and often it goes back to the tribe of Dan. So I believe the false prophet can trace its actual Jewish bloodline back to Dan. Now, when that comes in forward to the present, I'm working with a woman in South Africa who, all the people I've worked with, if there was a candidate to be the mother and the wife of the hybrid false prophet, as of today, she fits the parameters for that. And she told me this, that her biological father is a direct descendant of Caiaphas, and that her biological father is what's the name? Not Joseph. Joseph Ben. I forgot the name now. Ben David. But she said, in terms of the occult underground, you don't see this. There is a Sanhedrin. She says there is an occult Sanhedrin, and she said her father, I think it's Yoshua Ben David. I think that's what it is. Yeah, Yoshua Ben David is what she describes her father. Is the head of the Jewish occult Sanhedrin, and working in complicit with the Gentile side to bring in the Antichrist, which I do not believe is Jewish. I believe is Gentile. But the Antichrist and the false prophet, they do have ancestral roots that are human, but mingled with that, you have the hybridization. So I don't know if that's something that people can grasp or not, because I think for me, as I'm working with this, is that these bloodline connections, especially the programming, is in the DNA. The DNA carries the messaging of that which it not only determines the function of every cell in our body, but DNA carries messages. And so if Satan can capture the DNA and enter his genetic programming into the genome, then a woman can conceive a hybrid because it's messaged in the DNA. So when we're doing our work of undoing this, we have to speak in the name of Jesus Christ into that satanic source DNA and neutralize the messaging that's there that defines their identity and begins to release them from a satanic imposed identity that actually shapes their whole view of God and themselves. I'm going to pause in a moment, but we know that the enemy's goal with the children of Israel are actually Daniel, Azariah, Mishael, and Hananiah. You know, we call them Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're pagan names. But you look at Daniel chapter 1. What was Satan's agenda? To change Daniel's name to Belteshazzar. The king wanted to assign them pagan names that represent their gods. He wanted to change their identity. Of course, they're not DID. They know who they were. But in terms of that particular domain, we can see the enemy strategy is to change their name. In the Hebrew, when you give the name, it's a destiny. It's characterizes who they're going to be, unless God changed your name, like from Jacob to Israel. So the point is, we see the agenda is to change one's identity right there in Daniel chapter 1. And so this goes deep when it comes to the satanic agenda for mind control, and especially those that have been selected to be breeders for the last days Genesis 6 project.
Well, that's exactly what we see today as well. They're wanting to change the identity, and what they don't call off, they want to basically rewrite our genetic code so that we become the slave race that is intended for this. now, of course, as we were speaking about Hitler, he desired also to bring in this super race. And I like the fact where you said the Rothschilds being the shield, they were shielding these royal families, such as the British royal family there.
Absolutely.
Can we talk a little bit about that there? What was Hitler? He was trying to bring this race forth. Was he in any way working with the British family? Because everybody looks at this, well, we had World War II and they all come against him. Or are we missing something in here? Because the things that I've seen about this war, well, let me let you speak on that, because I'm a novice on that issue.
Okay. Well, we know the British royal family, the Windsors, they changed their name from Battenberg to Mountbatten, or Windsors. They are all German. King George V, King George VI. So it doesn't look good to have somebody on the throne that's German, especially when you're fighting the Germans. But we know, and I have documentation here, that those members of the royals were all pro-Nazi. They supported Hitler. Even Harry has been caught celebrating Nazi kinds of ideology. So what we have with these royals, it was assessed in, I think it was in 1998 by the Executive Intelligence Review, that Prince Philip at that time was worth $9 trillion. So that's 9,000 billion. You can do a lot with that. Where do you get that? Well, if you bow down and worship me, Satan said to Jesus, I'll give you all the kingdoms of this world and their glory. So he had immense power. So in the beginning of my work, my number one nemesis as a handler was Prince Philip. The Queen is fully involved. I worked with 3 or 4 biological offspring. They even look like Queen Elizabeth, So they produced this hidden occult offspring, but they have been bought off to be a part of this. They supported that which would represent the Hitler Genesis 6 project. Hitler did not die until 1962, and I could go into a 15-minute documentation of that, but I can't do that right now. I have the documentation here on that by a number of scholars that demonstrate this. All right, so what was their connection? They had massive wealth. They supported the agenda. What was Hitler's goal? He lost the war in World War II. He thought that if he cleansed the blood, wiped out the Jews, he lost in his front against the Soviets, the mongrels. So he lost, and he has to ask himself the question, if we're the super race, how could we lose to these inferior mongrels, the communists? So he ruminates over this. Well, we hadn't cleansed our race. We still have this corruption in our midst. We have mongrels, homosexuals. We'll kill off as many as those we can. But our primarily corruption is Jewish blood. We need to cleanse the German people of this inferior race. So he said the only way we're going to come out on top is to wipe out all the Jews. So he's demonically driven to wipe out the Jewish race. He still lost the war. And so at the end of the war, and I don't have the quote in front of me, because of the confessional church, people like Dietrich Bonhoeffer and pastors who were coming together who were agreeing that this man needs to be killed. I mean, he needs to be removed because he's destroying the nation. Well, they died as martyrs. Bonhoeffer was martyred about 5 weeks before Hitler allegedly was killed. All right, so what happened to him? What did he do? He vowed, because he said, I didn't win the war, so he vowed that his goal to bring about the Third Reich could only come about if he corrupted and destroyed the church. So the whole scenario was set up so that it would be the belief, a scenario that he would die in a bunker in Berlin. We know that he escaped. He went to South America, with a number of people that saw him down there. His place is one of the places in Patagonia. We've had people that were with him in South Africa. I keep saying South Africa. South America. They were there with him, and this is corroborated by a number of testimonies. So what was the goal? He worked with Dr. Josef Mengele as the one who was a doctor in eugenics. He was involved with eugenics and twinning there at Auschwitz. So with the knowledge of Dr. Mengele, and who was also a sorcerer, they worked together post-war through the generational SRIDID, not only to bring an Ubermensch, but to make sure that this resource pool of women were Christians. And so why Christians? Because Satan understands that a Christian is a member of one another, members of Christ. And if we can capture and infect, program these people to become weaponized in the body and bride of Christ, we can weaken and in his mind to destroy the church. So when he blamed what was the fault of the Jews in World War II, in order to bring forth Ubermensch and the final world ruler, we have to defeat the church. So God in his sovereignty allowed this project to go on for years. And so the church is now filled today all over the world. I've met them all throughout Europe and South America and here. They're here. They're Christians. They have a Christian front, but they have a backside. Russ Dizdar has talked about this in his work. And so they have a backside. They are literally a weapons platform. And they're sent into churches to weaken, to destroy, to channel, and to bring down pastors. But their primary goal was to be a breeder to bring forth an Ubermensch. And so I believe he's here today, Steve. I believe that he's here. He's not been revealed, I believe, because the restrainer hasn't been removed. But the point is, we are truly at the end of the end, and the church as a whole and as pastors, the majority I've met, are completely asleep that if this church is salt and light, if they really represent a real or potential threat of Satan, he has placed his assets, his weapons there. And these people who are weaponized don't even know they're weapons. And so this is a very effective agenda that was energized by Satan to weaken and destroy the church in the last days. But what I've seen in the last year in bringing down the matrix, if you look at the Hebrew in Isaiah 25:7, and I will swallow up the face of the veil that is over the nations. That word veil there, lut, it is in the Hebrew like a hologram. It will be associated with the magicians in Exodus 8, I believe it is, in there where they had magical arts, magical powers. It's associated. So the face of the veil is put in place through magical arts, witchcraft. And he will swallow up the web that is woven over the nations. Nasak, that is used women to make to be used in ritual, to bring together kings and alliances. So we see this veil that is woven over the nations is real. It is stolen neshama. Satan has stolen this through death rituals to create this veil that is over the nations. And as this veil is coming down and the life essence is being reclaimed from all these death rituals, the veil is getting thinner and thinner and thinner, so that Jesus in the third heavens, when he passes through the second heavens to catch the church up in the air, the first heavens, a way has been made for the Lord to return. Just like in the first advent, Steve, there had to be a waymaker. I mean, John the Baptist was called to be the Melech, to be the messenger of the Lord, to prepare the way of the Lord. And so when he comes, and in a representative way in John the Baptist, we see he came to prepare the way of the Lord. And how did he do that? To get a people ready and prepared for the Lord. So John the Baptist was necessary to make way for the Lord. Well, it's the same thing today. For the Lord to return, he knows when he's going to return, but he's allowed Satan to create this barrier, this wall in the second heavens, this veil to represent a barrier between the third heaven and the first heaven. And as that's coming down, it's all spiritual and dimensional. It's real. As that's coming down and being dismantled, we see that the powers of darkness that once occupied those places that had been interfaced with the people of God through rituals, as they're being dislodged, they're showing up on earth. And what do we see? The increase of lawlessness, because they're being displaced. And so we know the coming of the Lord is drawing nigh. And as that veil is thinning, and when Jesus returns, there will have been a way made for him to return from the third heaven to catch the church up in the air. In the first heaven, we'll meet the Lord. And then courtroom time. 1 Corinthians 6:2-3. Know you not, you shall judge the world. Know you not, you shall judge angels. Speaking to the people of God. And that's big time stuff. when we enter into understanding what it means, what Paul meant, that you know you not, that you, the church of God, it will judge angels and you will judge the world. And so the big contest that's on right now, Satan knows that the church is ultimately in the plan of God designed to be his nemesis. He's doing all that he can to hold this stronghold in place and to thwart that which will be his final overthrow.
I agree. Two things I want to ask you about, and I think this will help us go into what's really going on right now as we're in our closing doors of the hours of humanity on this earth here. But I want to, and I'll mention both of these. Prince Philip, as we know, there is a connection to Epstein, which his death, and I'm going to get into that in a second with you there, because I know that in the interview that you did recently that I was able to listen to, I forget the man's name, but he was interviewing you. He's talked about his death, and you said, well, they have the means to be able to really orchestrate that. I know that for a fact from my work in the CIA, because when my own partner, who was an assassin, after taking out 8 prominent people, they had to stage his death in order to get him out of the limelight of everything. And every aspect, hospital, doctors, you name it, they've got everything under control and they can do whatever they want. But before we get into Epstein's connection to this possible breeding program and Prince Philip, etc., and all the people that he was in contact with, if we go back to Hitler just for a moment, we have a lot of documentation that shows, and I think these are connected in the breeding program, because I heard you mention 1948, the creation of the State of Israel, had a lot to do with this and the coinciding of those time frames. But Hitler's involvement in the helping of setting up the State of Israel, a lot of people are not really aware of that. I mean, I've gone into that myself before, because we've had a lot of Jewish writers that have exposed that connection, how that Hitler, because originally he just wanted to get them out of Europe, and then this whole thing to annihilate the Jewish people, which I think what he is trying to do, he's trying to get rid of the good ones. He don't care about the bad ones, would work with him. But can we talk a little bit about that, how they set this up, how that really started off this whole breeding program back in 1948, because that was something interesting to me when I caught a little bit about what you said on that, working up to maybe Epstein.
Okay. Actually, where I am now in terms of the sequence of the plan that is in operation today, and this has taken over 20 years for me to actually unpack this, there was a ritual that went down in the 12th century that represent the bloodlines that converge, that would bring forth the Antichrist and false prophet in our generation. The templating and the initiation and the pre-planned ritual occurred in the 12th century. We have a number of ways in which that's been corroborated through people who have deeply empowered strongholds that involve preconception rituals. Everything was set in place by Satan to bloodline agents in this 12th century ritual. I believe there was one in the inner city of London and another under the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. All right, so it was activated. This particular Hitler Genesis 6 project to bring forth Ubermensch was activated in a ritual 1944. This has taken years to all this to finally come together and be corroborated. And this was the convergence of the 13 bloodlines that preceded, and the new bloodline that was created in 1944 was Collins' bloodline. The Collins is the convergence of the previous 13 human bloodlines. Mixed with that was the DNA of Hitler, and because he qualified through the ritual killing of 6 million Jews, Satan actually imparted to him the primary DNA source code for the current Antichrist, the current Nimrod. There can be other ancillary representatives, but the quintessential Nimrod. So that Hitler Genesis 6 project, from where I'm working with now, had its inception in 1944. All right. So then there's sequenced release, and I really can't go into a lot of this because there was a collective conception, but through the cryogenic freezing of these embryos, they're inserted sequentially to extend out to bring about the agenda to bring in the Antichrist. So the event in 1948 was actually a convergence of what happened at the inception of this Hitler Genesis 6 project in 1944. Satan knew prophetically that with the birth of the nation Israel, it's a super sign that would inaugurate the last days. It's been the last days, but this ramps it up. And God knew, and Satan knew that once Israel is restored as a nation, Isaiah 66, 6 and 7, can a nation be born in a day? Yes, it was born in a day. He knew that he had a generation to pull off his final move. And God allowed him with certain restraints, but he allowed him. And so with the birth of the nation Israel, that whole thing was to be captured in such a way that he would try to control all the agenda that would not only involve Israel, but the nations that would represent the final configuration that would finally end up in Armageddon. So there's multi-layers to this in terms of high-level spiritual warfare, but God is the supreme and high and lofty one who inhabits eternity. He sits enthroned above the cherubim, and so God is allowing this chess game to play out, and we, the people of God, are the primary instrumentalities for him to see this resolved. So this huge drama, like one person said, that the human race is the whole human race from the fall of Adam all the way to the end of history with Satan as the principality of the air. The human race is a virtual courtroom where Satan is contesting having been judged to the lake of fire, and that's before the creation of man. We could go into that at some time. So he contested it. He said, and so he appealed his sentence. That's antidikos in 1 Peter chapter 5. He appealed his sentence. And so during this appeal, we're in the virtual courtroom, and once this appeal issue has been resolved, and we see Revelation 6 through 19, it comes to conclusion, then God legally can carry out the sentence. But we as the people of God, and especially during the church age, we are caught in the middle of this. And every way in which God has allowed this to happen, the big picture is who we are destined to be when time isn't no more. And when we are in heaven with the Lord, there is a vast range of differences in terms of vocation and degrees of glory. As one degree, a star differs from another, so will the resurrection be. So right now we are in training through suffering and through the battle we're in. We're being trained and prepared for a vocation in the ages to come when Satan won't even be present. So I think I just wanted to bring that in because we could unknowingly and without even thinking about it become so myopic that we're caught up with what's going on in the temple, which is real and important. But the big picture is, what is God doing in the church in these last days to bring about the final overthrow of Satan? So it's absolutely amazing to see, after 35 years for me, Steve, to see where we are in history and to see how rapidly this whole thing is coming down.
Yes. Was Epstein, was he part of the breeding program, or was he just involved in perpetuating a bunch of pedophiles that are in politics to keep them satisfied with their little lust?
Well, everyone I've worked with in the hundreds in the last 35 years never mentioned being a ritual Epstein. I think he was a kind of a guy that was such a pervert. He had to have 3 or 4 young women a day to satisfy his perversion. And so he was able to bring high-level politicians in, blackmail him, and that's where he got a lot of his money, I'm sure. So he's just a high-level pervert. Now, on that Orgy Island, there's indications, Tom Horn has uncovered it, there were ritual sacrifice of children. So there was ritual abuse, and there are very deep and dark things happened. But as far as anyone that I've worked with at the highest level of reporting being involved with the breeding program, he has never been mentioned. Clinton has never been mentioned. No president has ever been mentioned. But when it comes to Prince Philip, he was used as a financier. In other words, if somebody hired some biological father want to hand his daughter over to become a breeder, then it required certain programming. Well, if Mengele charges $100,000 an hour, which I don't know how much it was, but he came at a high price, who's going to pay for that? Well, I worked for one person, worked with one daughter who was dedicated to the breeding program and actually was created to function as a Genesis 6 domain. She was just from a family, and who paid for her programming? And she says it was Prince Philip. So he was a financier. He was, as he would use his wealth to support this agenda, he would be exalted by Satan and given a lot of perks. But he's fully human. I don't see, and no one's ever mentioned him as a hybrid. I think when it comes to someone like Epstein, he is just a very wealthy pedophile. I have not worked with anybody in my 35 years that's reported him being a part of this program.
Okay, and moving on as we kind of get closer, because I don't want to spend too much more time, because I know this, you know how it is, people's attention span would not last long enough. I could stay here for the next couple of hours with you, but we'll pick up another broadcast on this too. But when we had, there was a lady that came to us about 2 years ago, I guess, here when we first came back to the United States. We were living overseas, and she met with us privately. She spoke about the breeding program to us. She had a lot of knowledge on this. She knew one of the midwives that actually would do the deliveries. Now, what I'm curious about, she mentioned to us that a baby's gestation was not 9 months like you normally see. It was much more rapid. And she also claimed that these children would grow to adulthood much faster than what we normally see. Is this the same type things that you've heard about as well? And if so, or if you can kind of elaborate, how does this program really work, and who are the ones that they're actually breeding with?
Well, they have to be bloodline. Well, now, as of 1989, with the introduction of the Genesis 6 program, they can now be Genesis 6 to do whatever they choose. But leading up to this, those that had this particular bloodline that would qualify to be breeders, all of them are reported for years, from the conception to the gestation to birth. It's minimum 3 to 4 months. And once they're born, their actual growth rate and maturity rate is much faster than the human level. So they all report this. And so, I don't try to seek to prove anything, because my goal is to see these people get better. But the corroborative testimony throughout the years establishes that fact. Now, it's interesting that in the whole ufology abduction phenomenon, where the whole thing is these are aliens and ships and all that kind of thing, or UFOs, that they all report a similar kind of thing. So what is UFO? What is going on here? Well, these craft, some of them are physical. They're Merkava is what they are, but they're the Satanic version, and they're symbiotic. And so these craft that are used in this whole program, they're real physical things. And some of the UFOologies or the UFO phenomenon is really a fallen angel. But this connection with abductionism and ufology and the hybrid breeding program is all very much interrelated and interconnected. The only thing is that the deception is that these are from another galaxy, or that these are aliens. These are bred right here on planet Earth. This is the days of Noah. So Satan is obfuscating this and covering it up and making everybody think, well, this is an alien phenomenon. But getting back to all those that in this abduction phenomenon, they report the same thing. The people I'm working with that are born in the program, they report the same thing. The gestation is from any 3 or around 4 months.
Now, are they, from another thing that I was told as well, is that, or maybe actually I should say this came from my wife's research, the whole purpose for this breeding program is to create, quote unquote, a Nephilim race that would be the new super race on earth, that their desire is to conquer, overthrow, lower the earth's population by artificial means, also by, there's a lot of talk about a coming asteroid belt, things like that. That's what I was told from people I know on the inside. My wife believes too that this may be something that they have created themselves to bring about a catastrophe, to lower the human population. Same thing with this pandemic that we have here. A lot of things could be said there. But the ultimate goal is to lower the numbers of people on the earth, and then what remains would become the loyal subjects to be a slave race for these Nephilim inbreds. Is that?
Yeah. In fact, Dr. David Jacobs supports that. That's the whole narrative that he's heard and working with 40 years with what's called the abduction phenomenon. We know that this is the goal. Well, I'll go back to a massive ritual that occurred in New Swanstein. New Swanstein Castle is the castle that Disney modeled their version after. It's New Swanstein in Bavaria. I've been there twice. There was a massive ritual that went down there in 1976. And in this ritual, the current human kings of the earth, they're the hybrid presence, those that were the quintessential, not the mutations, but those that represent well, we go back. If you give me your women, we will give you technology. That goes back to Germany. Where did they get this Nazi Bell? Where did they get this technology to be so superior in their technology? Well, you give us your women, and we will give you technology. Okay, so they go along, but then when the offspring get to a certain point, we're here and we're gonna take over your technology. So it's been incremental. So in 1976, and this has been corroborated with a number of people, it was a massive ritual that occurred in New Swanstein. The heads of state, it was massive, it was horrific. There was an ascension of the King of Jerusalem that was crowned there. We know the individual. He is the seminal head of the Collins dynasty. I know him personally, and I'm not going to go anything more than that. But in this particular ritual is really key. The transfer of that which represents the authority of the human kings of the earth was transferred to the hybrids. So from 76 on, behind the curtain, you have the political rulers, but they all answer, and either directly or indirectly, to a hybrid council. So if you want to know who the Illuminati is, you don't have to look at the Bilderbergs and all that, whatever they are. They're the outer echelon. They're the gophers, and they have the money, etc. But when it comes to the final decisions, the rule of the current kings of the earth that are spoken of in Daniel 2, those that have the authority and the satanic hierarchy over the earth are hybrids. Hybrids do not have a human soul. They are proxies of the very nature and character of Satan. This is non-reversible. And so when Jesus returns, that this overthrow of these kings of the earth is going to be immense. Because the kings of the earth, we know from Revelation 19:19, are going to have all their weapons pointed towards heaven and to wage war against the Lamb and those returning with him. So, and it's really important to recognize that when you're dealing with a psychopath, Satan in his mind believes to win, he has to believe that he has an option to win. And if he has an option to win, what option does he have other than to kill Jesus Christ? So when Jesus Christ descends in Revelation 19:19, is he just going to be shooting pea shooters at him? Or does he have weapons in place on earth to destroy God? In his mind, he has to destroy God. Now let's get back to the different echelons and orders of the hybrids. We have the quintessential, which is the gene pool, resource pool, for the quintessential representation of the Antichrist and false prophet. That's very restrictive. But then you have another layer of that which is now the fulfillment of the Genesis 6 project. It's the creation of hybrid offspring that will make up the armies of the Antichrist. And when you, especially if you read just read the Hebrew of Joel 2, 1 through 11. we see that locust army. These are not locusts. I believe these are a hybrid army that are currently being bred underground. We've had people that have been there. They've come out of there. They've seen it. I've interviewed a brother from South Africa. He's been to Antarctica and other places where this the breeding of this army is well advanced. And when they come from out of underground, I'm sure they're going to masquerade or be presented as aliens. All right. So let's go back to the fact that when Lucifer fell and became Satan, how many angels did he take with him? Well, I believe the scriptures are clear on that. He took a third with him. All right. So he took a third with him. Two issues here. Those fallen angels, are they equal in power and dignity as an elect angel? No, there's a degenerative factor there. So 1/3 went with him. That leaves 2/3 of the elect that are superior, not only in number, but in quality. So what is Satan going to do if he's going to win? He's already at a disadvantage. God is allowing him to do whatever he needs to do. So the whole hybrid breeding program is not only to bring in Antichrist and false prophet, but to create a vast end-time army of Joel 2:1-11 hybrids to give him a sense of advantage to win the war against God. Now, as Christians, we think, well, that's really ludicrous. We know he can't win. You tell him that. You go ahead and sit down with him and tell him he can't win, and you're going to find out that he will not believe you, and he will assert in his arrogance and his psychopathic megalomaniac personality that he must win, and so he is fighting as if he will win. And we have to get that straight, or we have underestimated our enemy, which is very dangerous, and it's also fatal if we overestimate him, because he is nowhere at all equal to the Most High, and he is absolutely subject to Jesus Christ. That subjection was made active 2,000 years ago, last verse of 1 Peter 3, when Jesus Christ passed through the heavens, who was exalted above the heavens. He went through enemy territory, and he took his seat at the right hand of the Majesty on high after all rule, authority, and principality and power were made subject to him. So he knows that, but the war is still on, and we're coming to the final denouement, the final end game.
I can completely agree with you on this. I have one final question, and we're going to have to go next time because I want to go into the Antichrist and all this part here, if we can schedule again sometime, Doug. But the question on a lot of people's minds might be, where are these quote-unquote fallen angels? Where do they hide at now? It seems to me that you've alluded to underground quite a bit. I've always thought the same thing as well, that they are somewhere in the heart of the earth. I know there's been a lot of talk about Antarctica, places like that. And I ran across a thing I forget where it was at now. I did a video on it a little while back about the angels being imprisoned in Antarctica. But I do know, and I agree because I've seen where you spoke about this before, the angels that were imprisoned are not all the angels that Satan had. That was specifically only those that procreated with the women before the flood there. But it is interesting, though, to note, though, that they would always be involved in the affairs on the earth. I think that's in the book of Enoch, though. I know that we have fragments in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but I can't corroborate that completely. I just find that an interesting note. But a lot of times people forget, Satan is not the one that's imprisoned. It's just that group there.
That's
so
right.
We're dealing with that. And as you said, these are not aliens from outer space. So that leaves the question is, where do they live?
Okay. First of all, we know that the prince of the power of the air and the principalities, these are spirit beings.
Yes.
Whenever in Genesis 6, when they abandoned their oikonomia, their habitation, they took on physicality, and they are very clearly imprisoned. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4, Jude 6. They're in prison, but that's that specific group. So that leaves the rest of the fallen Beni Elohim, what we call fallen angels. They are a part of that prince of the power of the air, the lower atmosphere, where Satan rules this world. He's in the atmosphere. Now, when it comes to his offspring today, they have physicality, so they have to have locality. And so the reports that I've received, there are vast underground networks and tunnels. Some report of somebody told me there's over, I forget how many underground bases there are that were built. Phil Snyder was killed uncovering this. But there's vast underground network bases that are multi-layered. They're connected with tunnels. This is, you can look at DOMB, you can find on this online. But we have people that have been taken there, and they have been a witness to these creatures that are currently being created and bred. So it's going on now. I just interviewed the brother from South Africa. He was taken to an underground facility there in Antarctica, and these entities were there. They're in these tube things, and they're being gestated. So it's a vast program. So we have to understand that the disadvantage that Satan has as being 1/3, this army is being built, and it's going to be released. Now, these angels that sinned in Genesis 6, and perhaps, I don't know if any of those that are involved with the spirit beings that are producing physical offspring today. But when we look at Revelation chapter 9, it says a key was given to the angel of the abyss. I mean, the Abaddon there. It was given. In other words, in the sovereignty of God, it was given. It's called a theological passive there. And these entities are released. These entities, what we see there is what happened. These angels that fell in Genesis 6, they're leaving their former sphere of rule, their habitation, Jude 6. They have been so transformed as evil. When those angels that sin in Genesis 6, when they're released, we see what they look like in Revelation 9. So what God is saying, oh, you want to worship somebody other than God. You want to worship your filthy idols and your filthy demons. You want to worship that? Okay, I'll give you a taste of what it's like. And he lets these creatures out to torment and to do all this as his judgment. And so these angels that we're talking about today, I believe that they operate in what they call the eros, the lower atmosphere. Their offspring primarily are held and contained in a vast network of underground bases.
I found one thing interesting recently. I was looking in Job 38, verse 13, where he says that he might take a hold of the ends of the earth and the wicked be shaken out of it there, which seems to indicate that that's exactly what would actually take place there, that they're actually inside the earth. Doug, I can't thank you enough for coming on and being with us today. And so, friends, those of you who are listening, this has been enormous more information for me to be able to really ponder, think about, and study on as well. And hopefully we can get Doug back to talk about the Antichrist, the false prophet, etc., because I know he's got a lot of thoughts on that I'd like for you guys to be able to hear as well. And I think we've been on, I don't know, maybe about an hour and a half now. So, Doug, thank you so much for your time, and we really appreciate the work you're doing, and I'll continue to be studying a lot of what you bring out as well. So any closing comments you'd like to add?
Just that God is his counter move at the end. I mean, Satan is playing checkers, and God and his holy elect angels are playing chess. So we have to remember that in the midst of all the concluding move to, the Georgia Guidestones to wipe out mankind, that's the agenda. But God has an end time move that we have yet to see. And on my website, it's, I think, under the video section, Jesus Christ, the Bright and Morning Star. What that means when Jesus Christ arises as the bright and morning star in the hearts of his last days remnant, 2 Peter 1:19, it's game changer, because it's a shot across the bow to principalities and powers. It's over. That earth is going to be taken back, and we, the royal family of God, members of the body of Christ, are going to be the agent for the ultimate displacement and the overthrow of the satanic hierarchy. And I do seek to cover that in the video section on my website called The Celestial Court. The role that the glorified church will have from heaven in the final destruction and overthrow of that which we see in Revelation 6 through 19 to prepare this world for the coming 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ. So it's a big hallelujah. God rules. Nahum chapter 1, verse 7. The Lord is good, and he is a stronghold, a place of safety to those who trust him. And he knows those who take refuge in him. He knows. So in the midst of all that which is going on, it's real. Everything that we experience in our physical realm, which is very real, to cause fear, to cause panic of what's coming upon us, that's all real, but it's not the truth. The fact is that all three persons of the Godhead indwell every believer. And whatever that means for him to be let loose as we choose holiness and walk in the fear of the Lord and become the people of God that he intended us to be in this last generation. When God is let loose to counter the final move, it'll only be a remnant. And there's a lot's going to happen before that occurs. But we are facing that final confrontation where the church is going to have the opportunity to really become the church. And so that's my prayer in Jesus' name.
Amen. Amen. Thank you guys so much for watching. Doug, one more time, your website, how can people find you? And do you have a YouTube channel as well?
Yes, it's listed as, it's called Book Ministry. I think it's there. It's our web administrator that does this. So it's somewhere on there, but it's DougRiggs.org. And so that's that. And if you go to the video section and click on the videos, you'll probably find it there. But I don't ever go there, so I can't be much of a help with you.
I know how that goes. I don't go to mine either, so it's very funny you say that. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching today, and we trust it's been a blessing to you.
Amen.